At the VUC, IP Communications and VoIP Community. We would like to thank Simwood.com for their support. Simwood can turn you as a developer into a telco. Our hosted PBX is from OnSIP.com. You can go to GetOnSIP.com for a URL people can click to call you. We've been privileged over the last 5 years to be using the best conference bridge on the planet. Yes, I'm talking about ZipDX.com, full color, full featured, full HD conference bridge. Our website, vuc.me on the webs, hosted by Bluehost.com. And our worldwide local rate dial-ins are from Voxbone.com. Okay, excellent. And with that, we're going to switch over to not Tim, but me. There we go. And this is VUC 566, November 6, 2015. We're going to be talking about Outernet. And we have Thane Richard with us, and he's going to be joining us in just a second. I just wanted to mention, I don't have a slide for it, but we do have a thing coming up that I will be in Lisbon, November 17th and 18th, and that is TAD Summit. So look up TAD Summit. I got so excited I choked. TAD Summit, TADSUMMIT.com. That's in Lisbon. It's going to be a lot of fun. And we're going to be in Paris with TAD Hack after that, and that's December 12th. So we got time to build that one up. Let's go over to Thane and welcome him. Thane, glad you were able to join us with such a short notice. Good to see you.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
And you are, I'm trying to remember how I discovered you even. Maybe I got a note from somebody. Yes, it was a suggestion from somebody, and it ended up being perfect because we had just had a cancellation. Why don't you introduce Outernet, but first tell us how you came to Outernet. What is your technical background, if I may ask?
So my background is actually more on the media side and finding different ways to get information to people. It's not what I was trained in or what I studied in college. I actually studied economics in college, but my first job was in India. I was working for a large Indian conglomerate called Mahindra, and I was based in Mumbai. And as a side project, well, I should say that I'm a pretty big NPR junkie. I enjoy NPR, and so on my long commutes in Mumbai, on the local trains there, which are very crowded, you can't really read on your commute, so I was looking for podcasts to listen to, and there weren't any on Indian news, and so I decided as a side project to sort of start one, and through that learned that news and current events are actually banned on FM in India, and so that was pretty shocking to me. The freedom of access to information and freedom of speech, press, is pretty important. And so I just started a podcast on my own. So I'm in good company here. And it grew, more people came and got involved. We ended up creating several different shows on different topics. And it ended up becoming sort of a pirate radio of news and current events. And we distributed it online to avoid that ban. And so it was through that, actually, that I came into this space of how to get the importance of access to information and just being generally informed. I was back in India in 2014. I'd been hired by Quartz to cover the Indian general election, which is the largest voting event in human history, the largest vote to ever take place on planet Earth. And I was on the campaign trail, and a friend of mine who actually worked at Twitter was and we were interfacing with Twitter a lot because it was a very Twittery election. The now Prime Minister of India was on Twitter constantly. And he told me about Outernet. They were looking to hire a marketing communications lead. And I was interviewing and talking about the position while I was on the campaign trail to Varanasi in India. And so I came on board last June. I was the third hire at Outernet. And now, since then, we've grown quite a bit. And not even a year and a half old, a lot has changed. We switched on our first satellite signal last August. We launched an Indiegogo campaign last November that reached its goal in 5 days and has continued to raise money since then. And as of this summer, We have increased our data delivery by 5x to a gigabyte per day. We're now on 6 different satellites covering pretty much 99% of humans on Earth. And we launched our first hardware receiver called Lighthouse. And I guess to rewind a little bit to what your initial question is, like explain Outernet a little bit, like what is the point? What is it? Outernet is the result of looking at this problem of why does only a third of humanity have access to the internet? And what that really is we looked at the problems associated with that access and the reasons why that number is so low, and came up with an alternate way of getting information to people than the internet. The internet first of all, it's expensive. You have a recurring bill associated with any data plan anywhere in the world. In different parts of the world, particularly in developing countries where majority of people are rural, you don't have very good data speeds. So there's that. And sometimes just the formality of creating an account, address verification, setting up an account with a telco is difficult. And then in other places, there's a censorship issue, and freedom of access to information isn't really a value that's respected by the regime. So we looked at those, and we created a system that is completely anonymous. There's no fee to receive the data. The speed is the same everywhere in the world, now a gigabyte per day, and there's no account required. We actually went out a few weeks ago in rural Illinois and nailed a satellite dish to a tree and plugged in a Lighthouse, and within a few minutes we're downloading Wikipedia articles and ebooks and some MP3 files. So that is the idea of Outernet, and we call it humanity's public library.
That's a great start. One of the things that people are going to wonder about is who pays for what, and it's something that you, as soon as you get on your website, which by the way is outernet.is, right? And I was talking to you about this just before we went live, actually. It's beautifully done. The design is wonderful, but there's so much information that needs to be communicated. It's pretty hard. You can't get it on one page. There is no elevator pitch, really, as I'm sure you realize. But one of the first things that people will wonder about is who pays for what. And what I noticed was that basically it's a publishing kind of model. You correct me, obviously. I'm going to turn it right over to you. But it seems to be a publishing model, and the people on the receiving end are paying only for whatever they have to put into having a satellite dish, and then the Lighthouse device. You want to go into, if we're setting this up in a village, what we need and the kinds of costs we're talking about?
Yeah, definitely. We created a page about that because we got a lot of questions. I think that the claim of free data, Outernet is completely free, makes people go, what's the catch? And we really wanted to make it clear that there really isn't a catch, that if you just get set up and you have these initial input costs, you turn it on and it just starts receiving data. So we created a page, it's outernet.is/costs, and really walks you through every possible cost that you have to pay for Outernet, down to power and import duty if you bought a Lighthouse and had it shipped to you. The premise here of how we make money is very similar to FM radio or any other type of broadcast model. And really that's what Outernet is you have FM radio for audio content, you have broadcast television for video content, you have newspapers and other publishing mediums for printed content, but you don't have any free source of information for digital content or data, web content, any type of digital file. There is no system for that. And that's what Outernet is. That's what we have created, is that equivalent of you get an FM radio, you buy it from anyone who makes it, you turn it on, it's a universal standard, and receiving that FM signal is totally free. And that's what we want to do. Lighthouse is the device that we sell, but we didn't even make Lighthouse. Lighthouse is a TV receiver made by a company called WeTech. And we put a different case on it, a clear case, because we believe very much in transparency. And we flashed our software onto it. And that's the Lighthouse. We also sell a Raspberry Pi-based do-it-yourself receiver kit. And that's based on another TV tuner that we found that is compatible with the Outernet signal. And what we actually want to create is a ecosystem very similar to FM, where we actually step back from the distribution of hardware and focus much more on creating a really engaging media experience, making sure that the content that we're sending is really what people across the world want to see, hear, watch, or read about. And that's the same thing with FM. I mean, how many radio stations do you know that make their own radios? We publish the designs for Lighthouse, for our device Lantern. They're all on GitHub. Nothing is hidden. You can totally. We encourage any Chinese manufacturing company who's watching this to steal our plans and make our devices cheaper than we can and get them into the poorest parts of the world. Because if we're really going to solve this connectivity issue, a small tech startup based in Chicago is not going to be able to get these devices to everywhere that they need to be. We have to rely on the makers of the world who are extremely crafty to do this. And that's why the Outernet signal is not, like, we haven't created something that's super new and techy and requires new technology and is really flashy and sexy in that regard. We've actually just taken something that's pretty ubiquitous, satellite TV, and just been clever with how we're using it to do something that's new and important and disruptive. You go into the most rural villages in India or Africa, and you'll see satellite dishes on shacks and huts. The distribution and penetration of satellite TV is pretty remarkable. And so the knowledge of satellite dish installers is pretty widespread. And so we're looking to piggyback off that and use that to get information like Wikipedia, Khan Academy, ebooks to places that have never had that before.
Okay.
Hi. Dan York, I have a question for you, just in terms of, so I guess the question comes back to, though, so who is paying, what's your business model for the startup?
The business model is, so right now, hardware, there's a lot of focus on that, because even though we don't want to be there eventually, because it's a new service, we have to seed the market and provide an easy way for people to receive the data. Where we want to be is somewhere where, like right now, you can go and you can support Outernet by supporting it $3 a month. And for $3 a month, like a coffee a month, we will add your Twitter feed to the Outernet datacast. So you get to be a 140-character editor of a piece of what we're sharing with the world. And that's an example of where we want to be. You have an organization that wants to send their particular data and use Outernet as a distribution system to reach their users or reach Outernet's users. They will pay the same way that somebody wants to. We don't support advertising right now, but I'd say we call it sponsored content. So it's content that we wouldn't otherwise broadcast editorially. We wouldn't select it, but it still fits within our broadcast guidelines. It doesn't violate any of our values. And you pay a per megabyte rate to send that to the world. We also offer the ability to underwrite content that we would broadcast anyway. So very similar to public radio, if there's a show that you want to associate your brand with, or just your name with, an individual can come do it. Say you want to underwrite the cost of sending the Bible over Outernet for a week. You can pay a fee, and it can say, like, the Bible brought to you by Dan York.
Now, so it's interesting. So I guess the question I have is then, so what is the user experience? Yeah, I know, right? What's the user experience? Somebody using the service, as far as what you've just described. I mean, sounds to me much like a broadcast model, obviously. But if it's a internet connection, do they have a choice of sites, or how does this work?
So it is not an internet connection, and I think that's an important thing to understand, is that this is a one-way download of information, the same way FM is a one-way receive of audio information. An Outernet receiver is kind of like a hard drive connected to a Wi-Fi router. The hard drive gets data dumped on it through the satellite dish from Outernet, and it gets stored there. And you're able to connect to that hard drive through the Wi-Fi that a Outernet receiver emits. So Lighthouse emits its own Wi-Fi signal, and any Wi-Fi enabled device can connect to it and browse through whatever content it has received from Outernet. And you do that in a web browser, and because we can send any digital file, it looks and feels like the web. We can broadcast entire websites, and they just get cached locally. And so that's the content that you browse through. It's a combination of three different types of content. One is what we're editorially selecting that we deem as important or is meeting the needs of where we see Outernet receivers popping up. The second is the sponsored content that I mentioned, and we've decided right now to cap that at it will never be more than 25% of the data that we send. You know, we don't want it. I come from like I said, the pirate radio of news and current events. You know, I'm very much the content junkie who doesn't want to see it taken over by ads or paid content. But I think paid content can actually be very valuable and important. But the third is a publicly curated selection of material. And we're developing a platform that's kind of a mashup of Reddit, Wikipedia, and YouTube. The public editing side of Wikipedia, the voting and hierarchy, the triage that Reddit offers, and then the ability for anyone to add their own content that YouTube offers, kind of mix match to fill that public curation side. And then the final element of that public curation is if you're out in the field, you have an Outernet receiver. In a lot of these places where Outernet is actually very useful, where data is really expensive, you can't get like a TED Talk or you can't get something from Khan Academy because the bandwidth required for that video file is just too expensive. You may still have a cell phone and you may have WhatsApp or Twitter because the data required for those communication services is pretty cheap. It's a very low bandwidth return fast, just messaging. So you can message us and say, hey, Outernet, we want more third grade math videos in Hindi to be broadcast. And that would show up, the goal is for that to show up in that public space and then allow the crowd to go find that best video and debate which one, is it better from CK12 or Coursera or Khan Academy to fulfill that request.
Now, is this one feed for all the devices then?
Right now it is. Right now it's 1 gigabyte per day, and that same gigabyte goes to everyone, and the filtering of what content is relevant to you happens at the device level. So you configure your Lighthouse, say if you're in India, you say, I only want to get content in English or Hindi that is tagged as India or Asia or Bollywood or whatever it is. Your Lighthouse still receives the signal that has Spanish content headed for Guatemala, but it just ignores it and it doesn't store it.
Interesting. So basically the Lighthouses then are a 1 gigabyte device that's, like you said, it's a Wi-Fi router, it's got the local hard drive on there that's storing all this in effectively, right?
Correct.
And so I guess, so how often a day? Is it just once a day that this happens?
It's continuous.
Oh, continuous. Okay. So you're always getting that updates.
Yeah, and there's a lot of situations where that's super relevant. Think about like a disaster. You have a tsunami or a conflict situation that, like the Arab Spring, where they shut down all the ability to receive information or tweets, or tsunami wipes out terrestrial communication. You come in with a satellite dish, get it pointed, and you're immediately up and running. And you can get real-time information, updates on like where relief efforts are being distributed, where survivor lists at different hospitals in case you have to locate your family. As long as there's one person who can get information returned back, maybe it's an aid worker or someone who can like talk back to the grid, we can then push that information back down to everyone.
Fascinating. Now, I guess I'm curious too. So you say it's 1 gigabyte per day, and is that the total amount of content that's local on? So I guess throughout the day you're sending updates to that file. I mean, what actually gets transmitted?
So I kind of break the content down into two big buckets, which I know is simplistic, but I distinguish it between breaking content, which has its value in its newness. So tweets, weather, prices, news alerts, those things that have their relevance, the faster you know them. And a day goes by, a week goes by, they get replaced by new information. Then there's more evergreen content, a textbook, Project Gutenberg books, of which we broadcast 30,000 of them. We added to our library. Wikipedia articles, though they do get edited often, a lot of them have that evergreen value. We break the content up into what we call carousels, and so we can have different carousels going simultaneously. And the way a user sees a carousel is just a download bar. So you can have multiple download bars of content happening on your Lighthouse at once. So you could have your textbook collection downloading the same time you're getting tweets downloading and new files coming in. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, so basically I was just trying to get so if I think about it, at your headquarters there, wherever you're staging the content, you've got your curated copy of all of this that you're doing, and then the updates are going out when a carousel, as you call it, a block of content, and that gets transmitted out over the wire, over the satellite, to the receiving boxes, who are then updating their local copies, basically.
That's correct.
Effectively, you've got a distributed data store in all those kind of places. Like, interesting. It's a fascinating idea.
Thank you. And you have to also account for, you have maybe a Lighthouse that's been installed for a year versus the Lighthouse or Outernet receiver that just came on yesterday. And so one of them already has a bunch of the content, like they've already received X number of Project Gutenberg ebooks. But the new guy doesn't have any of that. So you have to cycle through this, what we call the core archive, every few months or so, do another complete cycle of that stuff, while at the same time still pushing forward the latest breaking content as it comes out. And one thing that we've heard back from the field is that it's not always practical to have your receiver turned on all the time. There's load shedding, there's power interruptions. And so we've had people say, well, if I could only leave my receiver on for one day, could you say that, like, Nigerian content, most of it comes on Tuesdays, so that if I had to pick, I would leave it on Tuesday and get most of the stuff I need. Granted, I would miss the other days where I'd get the news of that day or that breaking content, but at least I'd get a baseline of material. So that's something that we're working on improving too.
So that leads me into a sorry, Tim Panton here. Hi. Leads me into a question about the hardware. What is the power consumption? You're going to you mentioned a Raspberry Pi with a TV tuner radio. Are we talking like 10 watts, or is this a heavy duty thing to run?
So the Lighthouse is 8 watts. The exact power consumption of the Pi mixed with the tuner, I'd have to get back to you on that power. What we're looking at doing in Lantern, and Lantern is the device that we raised funding for on our Indiegogo campaign, and we're a little bit late in delivering it. I think we're too aggressive on our development timeline, but it's actually the functionality of it has improved quite a bit from what we originally promised. Lantern, we have 2 power modes. One is like the receiving, just receiving and storing the data, and then when you want to connect to it and turn on the Wi-Fi access point, it consumes more power. So we're trying to be very aware and cognizant of power limitations where we're going. But you have to remember that in order for Outernet to be useful at all, you have to have users have to have devices. So they have to have a way to charge their devices. So there does have to be some sort of infrastructure of power, unless we're going into a place that has never had that before, in which case we have to think about bringing user devices along with us. And to that end, we're looking at creating a product that I'm tentatively calling like a classroom in a box that has a Lighthouse, a netbook, and some user devices. And so for like less than $300, $350, you could outfit a classroom with everything you need.
Okay, that's interesting. I've done kind of peripherally done some work with people who looked at solar powering stuff, and what the difficulties are of keeping things powered long term. What you tend to see in these kinds of situations is that generally people can round up a charged device when they want to, but the idea of keeping something running 24/7 is actually not that easy. It's the whole issue of, well, what do we do in nighttime? It's also very well we say we'll solar power it, but that means you've got to have a battery that's 3 times the wattage of what we really need, and the whole thing turns out to be quite an intricate game once you start going down that route. And so, I mean, we've seen projects where it's actually a lot cheaper to switch it off at night. You run the thing during the day off solar, and during the night it's off, and well, that's tough, and that sort of picture doesn't suit your model, because that's half the data gone. So there's an interesting